resource for you guys, right? So if you guys have questions for these people, please raise your hand. Please participate. Please get your questions answered. And then in addition, we have a couple of general questions that we can ask as well if people don't have any questions at that time. So everyone ready to get started? Panelists ready to get started? Okay, cool. So just to start things off, let's just go down the line and let's just say name, year, company that you interned at, and your position.
Sure. So I'm Vincent. I am a senior. Last summer I was interning at Northrop Grumman. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's a defense contractor, and I was working specifically in the Illinois suburbs. And my title, well, I was working with the systems and software engineering group there, so systems software engineering intern.
Hi, I'm Jared. I'm a senior. This past summer I worked at Bloomberg in New York City. They're a financial technology company. I was a software engineer on the portfolio analytics, so it's like a pretty cool intersection between tech and finance.
Hi guys, my name is Ryan. I'm actually a first-year grad student at Northwestern, but I did my undergrad in Boston in engineering, in like robotics engineering. I interned 2 summers ago at Uber's self-driving unit, so that was pretty cool in Pittsburgh, and that was a software engineering intern role.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah. I'm a senior. I interned last summer at a education nonprofit called Khan Academy in Mountain View, California, as a software engineering intern.
Hi everyone, I'm Stacy. I'm a junior right now, and last year I was working at NEMA, which is a startup in San Francisco that makes portable allergen sensors. And I was working as an intern on the software engineering team, but specifically working with data science.
We good? All right, cool. And then you walked in late. We're gonna do name. You got it?
I think I figured it out. Hi, I'm Andrew. I am a freshman, and I spent the last year and a half interning at Apple in their software engineering organization.
So does anyone have any pressing questions for these panelists to start off? You're like, wow, that company was so cool. I want to learn more about it. Anything? All right, cool. So first question then we're gonna, if a couple people could participate, is why don't we talk a little bit about the interview process and the recruitment process of your company and what you did to secure your internship? Anyone want to volunteer? Everyone hates this question. Yeah, if someone wants to grab it. Would you like to grab it?
We can start a line, yeah. Yeah, so I can start off. So I actually did an interview for NEMA up until spring quarter of my sophomore year, so very late compared to most people. And I would say that it was definitely kind of stressful at the time. It was kind of like just applying to anything and everything at once. So any place that would go. I actually found out about this job from a friend who had worked there in the previous year. So I got a referral from her, and that's how the head of engineering directly contacted me. And from there on, it was like a lot of like back and forth emails, and then it was just a quick coding challenge online, phone screen, your standard typical sort of stuff. And then I got the return offer within the next 1 to 2 weeks.
I don't know, like clicked the careers link, uploaded my resume as a PDF, hoped for the best.
How long till you heard back?
That's a good question. Longer than it usually takes at Khan Academy, but I think it's because their recruiting team is pretty small and kind of time crunched. And then after I heard back, it was pretty standard. I had a HackerRank test and then 3 phone interviews. I think they do 3 to 5, but they're definitely on the more intense end of the recruiting spectrum for internships. Yeah, so that. I've also had a lot of success getting first round interviews by cold emailing and cold tweeting people at companies. Yeah, so thing to consider if you don't have a lot of connections.
The recruiters came to my school, and some of the recruiters actually had been alumni of my school, so that helped. But aside from that, the process was they came to my career fair, and I was really excited about them as a company. So I was like the first one to go to that career fair. So like as a tip, if you really care about that one, like get there a little early. And I was able to have like 20 minutes with like the HR representative. So it was almost in a small way like a great first intro interview of sorts. And I passed kind of the HR round, and I had a direct interview with one of the engineers on the team. And he did an online kind of a phone call interview. It was focused both on talking about a project, which he was expecting to ask me about some projects, but I actually had done like some robotics project in class that was related to like self-driving vacuum cleaners, like a Roomba, but I kind of spun it as a self-driving car left, right, turn sign project. And they really liked that. I finished that the day of my interview, so it really aligned well. So talking half of the time, and I actually even sent him the report, so that was a little extra of me, but sending him the report, he's like, oh, I actually read through the whole README, and that was really cool. That actually gave a really good basis to show that I had some skills and really knew how to talk about some robotic and software engineering things. And then the second half of the interview was a phone coding challenge. And from there, then I got the offer.
Yeah, so last fall, I went to a tech conference out in San Francisco, and as a part of it, there was a career fair, and it was a lot of companies that like don't necessarily come to Northwestern, which was a great opportunity for me. And Bloomberg was there. The person I talked to at Bloomberg actually like messed up and didn't like know that you weren't supposed to like it wasn't like an interviewing thing, it was only informational. So he had me flip over my resume and like code on the spot, like just start like writing. Good news is I did well, because they then sent me, I kind of like skipped the phone interview that I guess they do, the phone screen that they do for everyone, and they immediately gave me an on-site. So they flew me out to New York and then put me up in a hotel for the night, and then it was basically all day interviewing the next day at their headquarters, and that was about like 3 45-minute interviews, and then lunch with like other people, and then an interview with HR, and then an interview with a senior software engineer, and then I think like a week later they got back to me. But yeah, I think also something that I wasn't expecting whatsoever was the interview with the senior software engineer, where it had no coding, but it was still very technical. It was like a systems-based question. So my tip for like interviewing is like, yeah, like be good at the coding interview, like coding parts of things, but also like practice the non-coding, like overall systems problem-solving side of things.
I probably had a pretty unorthodox story about how I got my internship, but basically I was at Tech Expo, which is the winter career fair, and I had a really, really long talk with the recruiter and one of the managers at Northrop Grumman. So we talked a lot about one of my projects, and they have a group at Northrop Grumman called the Modeling and Simulations Group, and that was like a lot similar to what I had worked on in school in one of my graphics classes. So after that really long conversation, I had like a informational behavioral interview, and once I passed the background check, which you have to do for a defense company, I was given an offer.
I unfortunately don't have any great advice for how to do well in the Apple interview process. My journey was kind of long and winding in the sense that it really started when I was 14. So, I mean, it's really long. But essentially, every year Apple holds a worldwide developers conference. And in 2012, the first year I attended, they started to offer scholarships to people under 18, and I applied and got in. I then was lucky enough to get in the next 4 years, and through all the networking I did and connections I made to various engineers at Apple, I was able to get myself an internship when I turned 18.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to add something. So one of the big things that I've seen had success at career fairs, if you really do your research, like, and I mean like really do your research and know what the company does, I think you can have like some similar success stories to what I was doing. Because one of the big questions I was asked at the career fair was, why do you want to work here, and like what do you like about what we're doing? And I was able to go into some specifics about that, so that helped me a lot.
One more thing to add. I recently went to a Microsoft career event here, and the representative asked the room, anybody know Microsoft's mission statement? And not a single person knew the answer. For literally 3 minutes, everyone just sat there in silence. Like, if you want to interview for the company, at least know like the basic facts about it.
That's a really good point. The company doesn't want you because you want just any internship. They don't want you because you want to be able to say that you work at Microsoft. They want you because you want to contribute to that company and you believe in what they believe in. And recruiters and engineers take that very seriously.
So kind of as a corollary to what's been said about the importance of knowing a company's mission statement, I've found it very important to have reasons you want to work for a specific company that are not so much product and mission related, but also engineering related. So things like knowing that certain companies work on certain tech stacks or are contributing very actively to open source by projects that are used by like a lot of other companies in the tech industry. That is when engineers ask you like, why do you want to work for this company? It's like very compelling to be able to talk about what you know of like what the engineering org does and how that contrasts from other eng orgs. And that's something you can figure out both by, so ask anyone you know who has like connections or has worked at that company to just like kind of tell you about their experiences there. You can, when people say like, do you have any questions for me? You can ask them like, what do you think differentiates your engineering org from like every other tech company? Yeah.
Awesome. Does anyone have any questions? All right. Well, going on that same kind of like train of thought, you guys said some like interview tips and some career fair tips. Do you guys have any tips for people who might want to work at a company that doesn't come to recruit at Northwestern and they might not have the opportunity to go to a conference where they can talk to that company at a career fair? How can we get in touch with companies like that?
You're cold tweeting.
Yeah, I think someone mentioned earlier, like just tweet at them, send them a direct email. I mean, you now all have access to Northwestern's alumni directory, and I'm pretty sure you can search for like people who work at specific companies and just send them an email. I mean, the worst that happens is they don't write back. I mean, I've had a fair amount of success at Apple just sending cold emails being like, hey, I'm interested in like this position or what your team does. Can you tell me more?
Yeah, networking is really big. I kind of doubted it at first because I was like, oh, I think I'm qualified. But the way the real world works is that if you know people, like life gets easier. So I don't know. That's just the way things are.
So a bit of an unconventional tip is that you can go on LinkedIn, type in any company and recruiter. You can get their name. There are websites then where you can put in like the company, like the domain for the company and someone's name, and it will tell you how that company structures their emails. So if you really want to cold email someone, you can like email a recruiter directly and be like, hey, like I'd love to hear more about your company, whatever, because these recruiters are basically just trying to find people, like their job is to find people, so you going directly to them helps a lot. And yeah.
I have two pieces of advice related to cold emailing. The first is to Google Philip Guo, Guo is his last name. Philip Guo's Guide to Cold Emails. He has a really useful blog post on how to write a cold email without sounding like super desperate and making it unlikely that someone will reply. So that was very helpful for me. The second thing is kind of related to it's an email finding trick. I have not had as much success emailing recruiters. I try to email engineers. If you find an engineer, like maybe on LinkedIn, who works at a company, and you go to their GitHub profile and you clone one of their repositories, then if you type git log, it shows you the log of all their commits. And commits have to be signed by an email address. So you can get their personal email. It works really well. This has like never not worked. Is all I'm saying. Yeah. Also, like, actually cold tweeting people is, I think, very reasonable. Not even individual people, just like if it's a small company, just like tweet the company's Twitter handle, be like, do you have internships for, describe your situation? Yeah, people will respond.
Do you, like, in the tweets, do something more snarky than just saying, like, I want an internship, or can you give me more information? Like, what is the content? I think that's something that's difficult, and I personally don't have a lot of experience with cold emailing, but like, what differentiates that cold email other than the fact that you found them on GitHub like that? But
I would say, so writing a really good cold email, hence the advice to read that blog post, is really important. If you write a cold email that's like under 5 sentences, broken up into kind of very easy to read paragraphs, you pitch yourself in like one sentence without unnecessary adjectives that a lot of people put in their LinkedIn summaries, people will be like, oh, this person like knows what's up, kind of type of deal. And engineers are like very, very willing to talk to other people about technical topics they're interested in, just because kind of we're all nerdy people. And as someone who like didn't really know people kind of in the tech industry when I first started looking for jobs, this was like a pretty good way to make those starting connections.
Yeah, that's a really good point, especially about Twitter. That was something that I had no idea when I was an underclassman that could be like a powerful. I thought it was just a normal social network. And then like I went to my internship at Apple, and my team was recruiting using Twitter, and I was like, what? Like they were tweeting like, if you're interested in a position with us, please send your resume to. And I was like, wow. So I mean, maybe you can like search on Twitter and find companies that you're interested in and follow their engineers. Might hit something important. Okay, cool. Let's talk a little bit more about maybe your internship and like the content of your internship, because you guys have so many diverse companies and positions that you guys worked at. So maybe a little bit about like your team, like how big your team was. Were you a part of your team? Were you sitting with a lot of different interns? What did your like summer in terms of the other people that you interacted with look like? Anyone want to start?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I was working at a startup, and it was really small. I think in total there are about 20 people in the whole company, and my software engineering team was 5 people, including me. So there was back-end engineer, Android developer, iOS developer, and a UI UX designer. So I was like really, really integrated in that team, and if I definitely felt like I was working on stuff that was being seen by the rest of the company. And as a result of that, I felt like I had any questions that I had, I could get like a direct answer, or like just a really quick, like just any quick advice anytime that I wanted it.
So Khan Academy as a whole is about 150 employees. Of that, engineering is about 50 or 60 people. So I was on a team that worked primarily on tools and products for coaches and teachers who use Khan Academy to assign content for students. And so that team as a whole was maybe 20 some people across kind of the tech team and like support people. So fewer of those people were engineers. I feel like I was definitely integrated as part of the team. Like when they were trying to get a project for me, they basically looked at the product roadmap and just like took stuff that like was originally deferred for a P2 or further out milestone and just like moved it up and gave it to me to work on. All the interns at the company were working off of the same kind of project lists and like backlogs and stuff as all of the full-time engineers.
And also I want to emphasize really quick, if you guys have any questions while people are talking, just shoot your hand up and you can ask them. Anyone else?
yeah, so my team was, I guess there's a couple hierarchies in the teams. There's focuses both on the whole. Okay, so for like self-driving cars, there's many different components. So like perception in terms of like the computer vision, the actual components for like the onboard platform that drivers or people who take care of the self-driving car monitor. So I was on the onboard integration team, and that encompassed probably like 30 people, but they're subsets of that team. And my two mentors, or the two full-timers above us, were like junior engineers, and they were assisting four other interns. So I was sitting with a lot of interns, and but the backlog of tasks and tickets that we were working on came a lot from the full-timers workload. So we were doing a lot of full-time work too. But we also had a full summer intern project, which was something that the full-timers just didn't have time to work on. And the two me and another intern kind of spearheaded that project together. So we had a lot of autonomy in terms of that.
A quick follow-up. So you said since you were sitting with mostly interns, did you still feel that like your full-timers or your mentors were there to help you whenever things were tough, or were things a little bit hard because you were like just logistically separated?
Oh, it was an open floor plan, so my mentor was really good at setting up official structures in terms of like, hey, let's walk and talk. Like that would be our weekly meeting, and he'd always pop by sometimes and just see like, hey, how's it going, and like pair on certain days. We were like 15 feet away from each other. Okay. So, I mean, with interns, like the four of us were like sitting next to each other here. But yeah, I think also that throughout the summer, I got better at reaching out to people that were outside of my team. I think a great opportunity in an internship is meeting a lot of people that is outside of your team, so having lunch conversations. But even more than that, sometimes if you see like a potential like, oh, this kind of overlaps with another team's tech, or I think there could be some collaboration, someone might have already built something similar, initiating those types of meetings across teams is really cool if there's like an opportunity on your project, and your mentors will be so impressed that you took that kind of initiative. And also a great excuse to like get more people caring about your problem. Yeah, it feels really cool.
Yeah, so the way I guess the Bloomberg internship works is that if a team wants an intern, they have to submit like a full project proposal of saying like what the project will consist of, what will the intern like learn, what will they like, what skills are we looking for, stuff like that. And that goes to, or like another committee, I guess not like a hiring committee, but then they match up basically all the interns all the software engineering interns that are coming in, and you kind of get like a lot of say with like what technology you want to be working with, what like back end, front end, stuff like that. So the team that I got set up with was a pretty established team. They were about 15 people, so it was definitely on the bigger side. And Bloomberg is about like 5,000 software engineers across the world total, and about 3,000 in New York. So I had like my own specific mentor, but then I had like this team of 15 people where I was like sitting alongside all of them. Definitely could go to any of them for help. And actually, a lot of my project was bringing in tools and technologies from other teams to our team. So a lot of my work was being able to basically message anyone on, say, like the software infrastructure team in charge of, say, like Cassandra or like Apache Spark, and basically say like, hey, I'm having all these troubles, or post in like there is kind of like all these group chats for all these technologies and stuff like that. So I would like, for the sake of getting help from other software engineers in the company, everyone was like really helpful, and there's always someone I could turn to for help if someone on my team didn't know it.
So Northrop Grumman's Illinois site has 2,200 employees, and they hired about like 100 interns last summer. So I was on a team of like 22 other people who were full-time. Some were new hires that got hired, like they started the same day that my internship started. But otherwise, most of my team was working on classified information, so I didn't actually have access to that. So that actually gave me a lot of independence, because my manager gave me work that was unclassified. And so I got to pretty much work alone on a code base all summer, which was really exciting work. But I also got to meet a lot of other interns. So none of them were on my team, but we were all like seated together. And so there's like 100 other of them. So I got to meet a lot of cool people this summer.
For me, for the sake of time, I'm going to skip the first few months of my internship where I spent on one team. I then moved over to another team for about 10 months. And on that team, because it wasn't the summer, I was the only intern there. I sat in an office with a full-time employee, was on a team of full-time employees, and I worked on Apple's Swift Playgrounds platform, which is essentially a way that lets people code on the iPad, which is really cool, and you should check it out. It's free. Just saying. That was an amazing experience just because one of the benefits of working at Apple is that anything you do has such a massive impact, like across the board. Like to see the work I was doing, like being put out in press releases, or the fact that I can go into an Apple store and just see my work on iPad, just see classes being taught with the things I built, is just an unbelievable like feeling. I then moved over for like a really short amount of time back into the iOS group and the iOS UI group, where I worked on some things with the Apple Pencil. And that was, again, similar sort of all engineers. I think there was a few career experience employees, which essentially like people from retail that go to corporate for a few months and experience that. But overall, at Apple, it's very team dependent whether or not you get put on like an intern project, which is like something you just do or you do with another intern for a few months, or you get put on like real work and you ship things. So I was lucky enough my first team, I was doing more intern work, but then I spent my next sort of 10, 11 months doing like actual shipping work, which is really awesome.
Cool, awesome. Does anyone have any questions? Oh my gosh.
We're gonna get
Well,
one
I have lots of
question.
questions, so no worries. Cool. So, nice.
What did you say was the company you worked for in Illinois?
Northrop Grumman. They're at the career fair tomorrow, so.
Raise your hand if you're going to the career fair tomorrow. SWE Industry Day, is that it?
Yeah.
SWE Industry Day. Raise your hand. Nice. You guys probably have a lot of questions, so raise your hand. Don't be shy.
Do you actually have a question, or are you raising your hand?
No. Does anyone know?
I mean, you could still go.
I think you
It's
just need a
pretty
wild
cool.
card.
Yeah, I think you just need to be a Northwestern student.
There are a few companies on the list that have on the spreadsheet, like we're looking for, we'll also hire bioengineer or bio majors or like sort of thing. I mean,
Yeah, actually, I think you definitely don't just have to be an engineer.
most of them are hiring engineers, but not all of them.
Yeah, especially if you're a CS in Weinberg, I think that's totally sufficient.
I mean, they're still recruiters, so they might not be expecting you as a non-engineer if you show up, but they might know of other opportunities. And since you're an engineer, you might be the only person that bothers to ask them.
All right, cool. Yes.
So for all you who have internships, probably have experience at industry days like this. Because of that, how would you tell us who have no experience to kind of approach these kind of events? Like, do you just have a couple certain companies in your head that you go for, or you kind of shop around and kind of find what you're interested in?
It's a great question. Can anyone say like their game plan maybe when they're going in?
So yeah, career fairs are kind of fun. Basically, my idea, like what I always go into it is like pick 5 companies, research them a lot, know kind of your stuff, like know, like be able to like if you were to have a conversation with a recruiter for 20 minutes, like you would be able to hold your own and know what they're talking about and what you're interested in, what they do, and like what Sarah was saying, like not just their product, but go onto Glassdoor, go onto other websites, see like what their engineering department structures like, go on their website, learn as much as you can about them. Then from there, basically, kind of have like it's called like an elevator pitch. Basically, just I just think of it as just like don't be awkward when you go up to them. And basically just kind of like go there with like a purpose. Say, I want to learn more. I want to learn if you guys have internship opportunities, something like that. But definitely like preface like, oh, I just want to have a conversation with you. And I think that will come off as a lot more natural. And then from there, I've been like told like people that like within a minute a recruiter will know like if they want to proceed or not. So that first minute is like the most important. And for that, just come off as natural, come off as like friendly, fun, and like say like you can mention like a cool project you've been working on. You can mention where you worked last summer, stuff like that. But just basically something so that they remember who that you are. Because if you just give them your resume, they'll probably just throw it in a pile. But if they ask for your resume and then they write something on the top, like you want to give them something to write on the top, I guess, of your resume, so that they then like reach out to you after the career fair.
I would also say that definitely get there early. So get there before the lines get long, because once the lines get long, you'll spend most of your time just standing around next to other students. And another thing I would say is that some companies don't really like give out like information unless you like directly ask them. So after Sweet Industry Day, I know a lot of companies do a lot of interviews on site on the campus, and it's really hard to like just go up to someone and say, oh hey, do you have an interview scheduled for tomorrow? But it really works. It shows that you have like initiative, and like you really like want to like move forward with this company. So always be ready to like ask questions that you don't feel like bringing up by yourself, like, oh, can I get your information? Can I connect with you on LinkedIn? Like they're always happy to help and always happy to give you an opportunity.
In terms of talking about experiences, if you don't have industry experience, just come up with some sort of other experience, whether that's a project, and if you don't have any projects, well, just talk about why you like computer science or what you're excited to do with an internship or full-time position or whatever. And I would also say at the end of your career pitch, I like to end it with a question, because sometimes you just stop talking and the recruiter looks at you and, well, they don't know what to say. So they're tired because they stand up there for a lot of time and talk to a lot of people. So I like to end it with a question.
Even if you're not sure about the company, always ask for contact information. That's like my number one thing I always forget, and then I realize that I have no way of like going back to them and like, because like if you email them afterwards, then they'll be like, oh, I remember you, like, yeah, let's move forward with the process, or they'll just not respond. But either way, like following up is definitely like the most important thing to do if you want to get a job, I guess.
Something else I want to add too, I think we mentioned earlier that researching the companies is really helpful. Something that I've had a lot of good experience with is actually tailoring your elevator pitch, if you can, to that company, like picking out the experiences that you have that best match what that company does. And then it's like really natural for you to be able to say, and that's why I'm such a good fit for you, you know, rather than like, but that can only be the case. You have to kind of finesse it, and it can get kind of tricky. But if you have the opportunity to do that, I would say definitely go for it. Any other questions? Yeah?
Do you have like an example of like engineering elevator pitch?
I want to intervene kind of on the premise of that question. So you said a generic elevator pitch, right? I would encourage people to think about your elevator pitch and then guess what the elevator pitch of everyone standing around you is going to be. Think about how many words in yours aren't in theirs, and try to make that number as large as possible, right? So if you're like, hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a senior at Northwestern majoring in computer science, and I'm interested in internship opportunities for next summer. The only word I said then that everyone else also didn't say was Sarah. So like if you think about kind of, this is related to what Meg said about thinking about the company and trying to finesse your elevator pitch to them. But if you can so details like what year you are or like what major you are can come later. So they'll ask, oh, and are you like, what year are you now? And you'll be like a senior, and that's like very easy and straightforward, right? So in your elevator pitch, I would make that more about like your projects, your experience, and like the reasons from either a product or an end perspective why you're interested in the company. And I think people really value authenticity and genuineness, and I would say that is even more important than appearing polished, if that makes sense. So it's fine if you don't have like a perfectly rehearsed and worded and really polished pitch. If you like show up and you're like very clearly excited, even if you can't find like the precise words to articulate, you know, some idea, like I think that's actually probably better.
This is a little unconventional, but I thought this was really funny. Over the summer, I met the head of recruiting for Twitter, and she said the number one indicator of whether she's going to give someone an interview during a career fair or anything like that is if they critique Twitter. If they have this, if her and the person she's talking to have this like long-winded conversation about the platform, about what Twitter is as a product, as a company, stuff like that, and they have ideas, they have their own thoughts on the company, because she was saying that anyone can just be hired as a software engineer and just sit in a room and code up like new features and stuff, but she's looking for, say, people who not only want to just be told what to do, but actually have some ideas of their own. So obviously don't go up to companies and tell them their product sucks and how it can be better, but definitely, once again, just tailor it to the company. Say, like explain how you can contribute to the company more than just being like a code monkey or whatever.
I have a follow-up question for you, specifically, I guess you, in your role. Kind of following up on that, like how much impact you felt or like how much ability do you feel you had to do something other than just be told to write code and do that, and then kind of be a little bit more client-facing and more idea-driven than just sitting and writing code?
Yeah, totally. So my project specifically this summer was kind of that my team had all of their data. So specifically, it was portfolio analysis. So if you have a portfolio of like Apple stock and Northrop Grumman stock and all these other companies, and you want to see like how it's doing, specifically risk, like what's the riskiness of it. That was basically my team at Bloomberg. And they host all their data in another company, like another team's system, so they wanted their own system. So my entire project this summer was basically going from the Bloomberg proprietary database to Cassandra. And no one on my team had used Cassandra before, and I was basically given free reign on how I was going to like design kind of the database system of it. And though, like, obviously my team was always there for like ask questions, like what do they think would be better, stuff like that. But for the most part, like I felt like I wasn't just like, oh, just coding up what I was being told. I was being able to design like one, this database system, and two, like the migration from the previous database system to the new one, stuff like that. So definitely like companies don't just look for like, oh, like, yeah, like any, like definitely the interview process makes it seem like all these companies are just looking for someone who can solve like inverse a binary tree as fast as possible. Like that's what they're looking for in an interview, because that like kind of weeds, that's like one of the only like qualitative ways to weed out people. But for the most part, they're looking for people who can actively contribute to their company in ideas and other things other than just what they can type.
Did you have something, Andrew?
Yeah, I can answer.
And I would say a good follow-up interview question, like if you do get an interview, is ask that type of question for internships. It's like, how do internship projects get decided? What kind of autonomy or what kind of decision-making process happens at the beginning of the internship? And that shows a lot of like initiative on your part. It's like, hey, you haven't even offered me the job, but I'm curious what's the first week going to be like. I think that'll be really good to know. I think it varies. And it's varied across internships for myself too.
This is still about sort of, I'm totally blanking on a question. Your freedom to like choose what you want to work on, right? So at Apple, again, like it's easy to forget that it's like a massive company, so it's very team dependent. First team I was on, I was sort of doing one thing, and then I said, that other thing frickin' sucks, I'm going to make it better, and that turned into my intern project. So that was a lot of freedom. My other two positions I was in was, since I was working on sort of shipping things, it meant that whatever I was working on is what the team was working on, and so that was either whether it was a direct like, hey, you have to do this down from our management, or that was sort of a team like, hey, we want to do something around this idea. So it was very dependent on what the team was doing.
Cool. And I think the original question was on elevator pitches, right? Okay. Yeah. Did we answer your question, or do you want people to keep talking? Okay, cool.
I would definitely add that, like, I forget who made the point, but like going in and knowing about the product and like having ways that you would make it better is huge. Like every time I've tried to like interview with a different team at Apple, it always helps it like, so what sucks about X? Like what would you do to improve our product? What would you add? And having like 3 or 4 answers that aren't just the first results on Google, like, are huge wins.
When I switched teams at Apple, I got the same question as well. Any other audience questions? Nice.
I think most of you already answered this question, but I just want to get more specific answers. Any things you wish you had known before the interviews, no matter like behavior interviews or technical interviews?
And I now realize that we are streaming, so I'm going to try to repeat the question for our viewers at home. Anything that you wish you knew before behavioral or technical interviews is the question. Anyone want to start? Don't all jump at the mic.
For behavioral interviews, one thing I can't stress enough is what you have on your resume is pretty much what's going to be the topic of your interviews. So if you list work experience, projects, whatever, come up with stories that revolve those projects. What conflicts did you have? What challenges did you overcome? What did you learn as a process of this? If you were to do this over again, how would you do it? If you can talk extensively about your projects, that shows that you had not only like a very significant impact on your projects, but also that you can apply your experience from before to an internship or full-time position.
Don't lie on your resume. Like, it's just like, I've seen it happen so many times in interviews where like you one day decide to do a small side project with one language and never touched it again, and then you put it on your resume and you get called out, like, what'd you do with that? And you don't have an answer. That is the worst thing you can do, because that you have no more credibility after that point. And it's almost like the end of the process, because if you lied about one thing, like, what else did you lie about? Similar thing, like if you're part of a club but you have nothing to show for what you did in that club, that's almost worse than not having listed it at all, because it's like you're just adding like random accomplishments but you can't speak to anything. So don't lie on your resume. Really bad. Make sure you can speak to every point for at least like some project you did or some contribution that you can show off.
Now everyone's excited.
So really embarrassing story. My freshman year, no one saw that. I interviewed with a company downtown in Chicago, and I like had this big old like languages I know section on my resume, and on it was Python, which is like, yeah, it's like now I'm like, oh yeah, it's like, that's like funny, because like, yeah, it's like an easier language to just be able to like do, and that's what I kind of thought at the time. The entire interview process ended up being only in Python, and at that point I maybe did like not a lot in it, just like quick scripting for something or whatnot like that. So it did not go well. I like asked like, oh, can I switch to like Java or C++? And they said no. Like, you put Python on it. We're a company that does Python. I'm like, okay. So yeah, really don't lie, or else it's the worst like 3 hours of your life.
Yeah, I was just gonna add to that. So this didn't happen to me personally, but while I was doing my internship, the team was actually interviewing for a full-time web developer, and I overheard the team talk about a candidate who also lied upon their resume, who said they had JavaScript experience, but once they got into the phone screen, they immediately said, oh, I actually don't know JavaScript that much. And I just overheard that conversation as it was like happening right next to me. I didn't feel good for that person. I didn't feel good for the recruiter, so don't do it.
No, I was just asking for you. Well, okay, I'll go now. I think like things that are domain specific, so knowing kind of technologies that they might ask about. So I knew this team was going to be talking about like communication technology, so they asked about different kind of like, do you know what the difference between TCP and I'm forgetting what are the other UDP is, and what those uses would be for robotics. I guess, yeah. So not even thinking about like technical questions, but related to, or sorry, not technical, but coding questions related to like system questions or understanding just technologies and approaches. I wish I was a little bit better prepared, because I just kind of fumbled my way through that. Yeah, so just, yeah, more in preparation there.
I think my biggest advice for technical interviews is like, so if you've heard of fake it till you make it, that's kind of my approach to like everything, but especially, so once I started, approaching interviews with the mindset that I was going to be, or at least pretend to be, extremely confident about what I both knew and didn't know, things started going a lot better. And so what I mean by that is I was asked like, sometimes in phone screens, which are like earlier on in the process than full-blown technical interviews, you won't be given like really long coding questions. They'll just like ask, like pepper you with like really short questions to get a sense of like, do you kind of know what's up or not? And so I was asked, for example, point blank, what is an ORM? And I like didn't know what an ORM was. So I said, what does that stand for? And they were like, object, like, I don't even know, like relational model or something like that. I don't actually know what it stands for anymore. So at that point I had like seen that sentence on like a blog post once talking about designing relational database schema. I obviously didn't know anything about relational database schema. So I said literally what I just said. That I was going to I was taking databases next quarter. I would like know that by the time I started. I gave my best guess as to what it was. Like stuff like that, right? Or if people are like, oh, what is X term? And you know that you're going to like be able to figure that out later because you're planning to do a project on it or something. Just like say that, say you don't know, and say what you do know around it. And then if you're in an actual technical interview, so I ask for a lot of hints when I get stuck. And the trick to asking hints is to be extremely clear about what you know and what you don't know. So I was in an interview where they were asking me to design like some data structure. I think it was like a min stack or something like that. Well, so I was using a heap as the underlying implementation. And so the runtime of everything was at least log n. And then they're like, okay, how do we make this constant time? And I was like, and so I like stared at this thing for a long time, and then I like didn't know how to move forward, and then I knew I had to say something. So what I said was, I don't know how to implement this function because if I think about the only constant time operations on common data structures are like hash table, lookup and insertion, stack and queue, push and pop. And I know it's not hash tables because this is not an associative problem, but I can't think of how I would do this using just stack, queue, push, pop, right? So can you give me like a clue about how to think about that? So that shows them that it's not just like I stared at this in silence and was like, oh, IDK help. And so you tell them, you get like pretty far along the reasoning process, and then you tell them exactly what you like literally don't know. And you ask for a hint about that thing. And everyone I've done this in literally every interview for like the past year, and everyone's been extraordinarily receptive. Because that mirrors how you would solve a problem effectively, like in the workplace with other engineers.
Just one small thing I will say about the technical interview is that it is really, like in terms of practicing, it is a lot about disciplining yourself into that like sort of technical interview mindset. So you're not going to be able to solve every single problem that gives you, and you kind of have to accept that fact. But what you do have to practice, especially on your own or with other people, like on your own time, is your ability to reach that stopping point and say, okay, what would I do or what would I say to sort of like reason this out. And this isn't something that you really can do by just checking in like every month or so, or every time you actually get an offer, you start practicing. Like this is something that you have to really constantly put yourself through in order to sort of like get used to that feeling.
Audience questions.
Specifically as the woman, what was like the safe bet, like the first day outfit?
Specifically for women, what do you wear on the first day?
So I was commuting from, so I was living at home, but I was commuting pretty far to get to where I was working. So I had an hour-long train ride. So I definitely wore like comfortable shoes. I wasn't gonna put myself through like high heels or something. But I generally wore something that was a little nicer than what I was gonna wear most of the days. Most of the days I was just wearing jeans and a t-shirt and a jacket, because it was San Francisco. But I wore like a nicer blouse, but then I like got to the company, realized that nobody cared. I just adapted pretty quickly to the work style.
I think this goes for like everyone. It's very dependent on your company. So most startups most startups will be like really casual and anything goes. Most very large tech companies like Google, LinkedIn, and so on and so forth will be slightly more, not necessarily nicer, but for example, people will probably wear like jeans or long pants. And so anecdotally, I worked at LinkedIn last summer, and everyone, including all the women, wore like jeans, long pants, and so on. And I got to Khan Academy, and my designer was wearing a tutu, and I was like, all right. So it kind of depends company to company, and I know that in finance, it's like generally more common for people to wear like generally nicer clothes and not tutus.
Yeah, so there definitely is a big distinction between like finance, like banks, stuff like that, and then like fintech companies. But at Bloomberg, it's like kind of really funny because you can immediately tell what like department someone works in by what they're wearing. So like if you're wearing like a t-shirt and jeans, you're probably in engineering. Everyone else is in suits. But definitely with like engineering, there's like hilarious amount of leeway with what you can wear. I wore like shorts and a t-shirt most days. Definitely like khakis and a button down when I interviewed and like first day stuff, and then I realized that was too formal.
A tip: I moved in. If you work in an internship where you like have corporate housing, you have roommates. I like sat down with them the night before. I was like, guys, what do I wear? And that was really helpful because they had worked at that company and they like understood kind of like the nuances and what that actually looked like. It's a good question. Do we have any other questions? All right, cool. Let's go back to the master list. All right. So if you guys could do each of your internships over again, what would you have done differently? It's kind of a tough one.
It is one. Does anyone have
My big tip is talk to literally anyone you can. The point of internships is experience. Sometimes it's like a 10-week, 12-week interview for a return offer, but when you're at an internship, you're really there to gain experience. So talk to anybody. They don't have to be in your group. They'll probably be willing to talk about what they do. You can learn more about the company. You can learn more about what other people do there. And then if you need help, most places should be really okay with helping you, even if they're not working with you.
Yeah, I would say kind of to go off that one, I definitely feel like I could have done a way better job at reaching out to other people in the company, because I did it like a couple times, but I definitely could have done it more where you can just cold email like someone else who works there and be like, hey, want to grab coffee at 3? Like takes 15 minutes out of their time. They're probably down for like the 15-minute break anyway. Stuff like that. Another big one was definitely reaching out to more people on my team for advice and for help early on. I definitely started doing it I did a lot more towards the end of my internship, and I realized how much more productive it made me, because there's such a big difference between like computer science homework assignments and like small projects to like working with huge code bases, and definitely using their expertise more would have made like the first part of my summer like a lot easier. But I just thought like, oh, that'll make me look dumb. Like they'll think I'm really dumb. Like I'm not gonna ask them questions every 5 seconds, when like I probably could have done that and saved myself like hours upon hours of time.
Something I would add is that this might be harder for internships where you go in and your project is locked in and they know what you want to do from starting off. But don't be afraid to like go up to your manager and say, hey, this project isn't really working out for me. I feel like I'm not really learning what I really want to learn. Like, is it okay if I switch projects? I know especially at my company, which was pretty small, they were definitely like open to any they were definitely really flexible with what I wanted to do. They wanted for me to have a great experience, along with the fact that along with me, like benefiting the company.
To pair off the like asking for help more or asking for just more help outside of your team. I think it's great if you find goals like that, you want to talk to more people, find allies that want to do that with you. One great habit I picked up halfway, maybe like a quarter way through the internship, was finding other interns to do coffee chats with me. It was a lot less awkward sometimes if you can't always follow up with questions for 45 minutes with the engineer or someone else at the company, but having like another intern with you gave me a lot of incentive. It's like, hey, who are we gonna have lunch with next? And having allies like that is great. So to double that, just having goals really spelled out and having your mentor become an ally for those goals, if they're on the same page, it'll be really helpful. So knowing that you might want to, in addition to like the internship project they assigned you, like I would like to really know what like some of your tasks are like. I want to know what like a full-time engineer would be doing, from the smallest like tasks and tickets, in addition to like this larger internship project. And just being more directed and communicative about that, you might get a lot of new experiences.
Something else I would say is try not to get too emotionally attached to your project. I don't know, I thought one of the things that I think is so kind of weird about an internship and probably like full-time in general is like this one code base, right? Like this one part of the code base maybe like becomes just like what you do day in and day out, like your entire kind of like work being almost. And like when something's not working out, it's easy to get really down on yourself and like kind of measure your like self-worth based on like how that specific thing's going, and like that shouldn't be the case. And like in school, you know, it's a little bit easier because we have so many different things going on at the same time. So just, you know, get excited about your internship, come in fresh, and don't get too emotional about it. Cool. Any questions? Audience questions? All right, let's see if we have any other from the master list. I think that's it. Do we have any final questions? Any final tips from you guys?
I have a question for the panel. So what did you guys think about like where you lived in relation to like where your internship was, or like what region of the country it was, and like what are your experiences with that? Personally, I'll just answer this. I lived in Evanston over the summer, so that was nice because I lived in my off-campus apartment, and there's a lot of people who stay in Evanston for the summer, but I was commuting 50 minutes every day, and that is not the thing you want to do. So
last summer, when I was at LinkedIn, we were in corporate housing. So if you haven't done an internship before, companies will often sponsor, like they'll just like rent out furnished apartment buildings in like some area for all of the interns. And it's like really nice, albeit it's like egregious on your tax return and everything. But so that was in North San Jose, and that was a nightmare. And so, and to give some context to that, there's like nothing except office parks and apartment buildings in North San Jose, and you need a car to get everywhere and stuff like that. And so this year, despite working in the South Bay, I lived in San Francisco and I commuted. It was also 50 minutes. I didn't mind the commute at all. And it was totally worth it to live in the city. Like so much stuff was going on all the time. A lot of my coworkers lived in the city and we would commute together. Would highly recommend if you're at a company where you can choose where you live, like do something new and interesting, not just what's like the most convenient.
So I spent a summer in San Jose as well, and it really made me realize why there's so many tech companies trying to make self-driving cars, because it's just a freaking nightmare to commute anywhere. It was literally a 10-minute drive to my office was about an hour and a half during rush hour. And since I didn't have a car, I had to take our corporate shuttle. Every day it was an hour and a half both directions for a 10-minute drive. It's unbelievable. I then moved into Cupertino, which is where Apple's located, and I literally lived in the apartment building next to my office, which was awesome and a curse at the same time because it meant that I never wanted to leave. Cupertino is a really weird place because you think Cupertino, you think Apple, you think, oh my gosh, just piles and piles of money must just be everywhere in the city, and it is not that case. It's kind of awful and horrible. So that kind of sucks if you want to work for Apple. But San Francisco is really close. A lot of people take the Caltrain. A lot of shuttles available. So there's some hope.
So I was living at home, so I don't like this much Bay Area dissing from a lot of people. But yeah, I was living at home, but I was still commuting by BART every single day, so that was also an hour. And I don't know, I thought it was nice. I mean, I had like the best experience that I could have, just by like being able to go home every day. I know a lot of coworkers who were living in the city had a lot of complaints about just like the area that we were living in. Our startup was based in the Mission District, so it's not like nice like downtown San Francisco.
Last chance for questions. Never gonna see these people again, so
We're literally leaving like campus forever.
they're done. They're done. So this is your last chance. I love that question. What did you do the summer after your freshman year?
I'm a freshman.
An anomaly.
TBD.
So I went home and I worked the summer job that I did in high school, and I turned out fine. I slept a lot and I played a lot of video games. You don't need an internship your freshman year, but it certainly can help.
I was fortunate enough to get an internship. It came pretty late in my freshman summer, but it was really exciting because I was working for an agriculture company in Iowa, but I was remote in Boston. So my data science mentor, he worked from home, and we had weekly meetings at different coffee shops across the city. And the fellow intern I was working with, we would meet up a couple times at different other coffee shops too. So that was a fun way to finally get to know the city I was going to school in.
Like I taught at debate camp, so that was fine. Yeah, I taught debate camp. I guess a extension to that is there was like literally nothing software engineering related to what I did, but turns out that at any operation or business where there is no one who does software engineering, all the processes are really bad, and anyone who knows anything about software engineering can make them a lot better. So I like built this thing that's like awful code. It's like Google Apps script. It hooked up spreadsheets and like Google Sites because everyone needed like a GUI, and it like made part of my job a lot easier. And then it was like actually really cool to be able to talk about that the following year, and had nothing to do with my job responsibilities, but was like a really interesting side development thing. So you can always find those things.
I was working at a research lab at UCLA, but the funny thing about that is I actually found out about that opportunity through the CS listserv. So you know how they send out like opportunities on the listservs for like research camps or like competitions and stuff. So I was really lucky to find that. It was a great experience, getting to spend the summer in downtown LA or Westwood. Yeah, so there's always something for you to do.
Yeah, I want to chime in too. Just like Vincent, I worked my summer job, and then at nights, I actually taught myself how to make iOS apps, and that was the best thing that I ever did. Like, I'm so glad that I didn't get an internship and I had the opportunity to do that. So that's something you can do on your own time as well.
I heard that the prime season for internships was fall for CS. Like, if you missed that window, how much are you giving up necessarily by the winter and spring?
Yeah, so the question is, can you find CS internships in the winter and spring, and how much harder is it than it is in the fall?
The fall's not over. There's a career fair tomorrow. But I got my internship during the winter, and I know a lot of startups hire in the spring. There's a spring career fair here, or a startup career fair here in the spring, and a winter career fair as well.
Yeah, I'll chime in and say there's always somebody that's looking for something. I got my internship literally 3 weeks before the school ended, so there's always enough time. Yeah,
something else I want to bring up, I'm not sure if we emphasize, is that generally the fall and panelists can correct me if I'm wrong. You're going to see a little bit more like big/medium companies recruiting because that's just kind of tradition. But in the winter and spring, you're going to see a lot more startups recruiting. I think in the fall, like for example, if it's a 4 or 5 person company, they're not going to be able to say, oh yeah, we want you in 8 months, you know. So you're going to see a little bit more recruiting closer to the time that you'd actually start. Any more questions?
So for the experience that you guys had on your resume in order to be able to talk about it and stuff, where did you guys get that from? Like clubs, or did you guys make projects?
So the question is, where did you get your background experience that allowed you to get these internships?
Mine came from primarily a combination of doing undergrad research, which is fantastic. Also a fantastic thing to do over the summer if you can't get an internship, because a lot of labs and profs here, even outside of CS, need people to do things like build websites for them, build like online experiments for them, build simulations, just like things like that. You get a lot of developer experience. You can often get pretty decent mentorship depending on what lab you're in, and it's like something pretty cool to be able to talk about. I did a lot of TAing for EX 111. As a plug, you should sign up to be a TA for EX 111. You should talk to me about that if you're interested. And that was actually like really important because it gave me a really deep understanding of functional programming, which is uncommon for underclassmen to have. And so I could talk about that in my interview and come across as like being a lot more mature than I actually was. And then I guess the last thing is like just like having projects that you've done even at other internships on your resume, or like side projects that you've worked on, even if it's like a really bad personal website, that still counts as a side project that you worked on. Projects that you did for school, don't like spin these as like things you did kind of independently all by yourself. But it's totally fine if you put like a significant amount of work into some like class project and you learned a lot of new things to like put it on your resume. Yeah.
I would say that I worked on 20 plus iOS apps, or I published 20 plus iOS apps over a period of like 4 or 5 years. So I just demonstrated I had a continued interest in this. I also, when I found people that worked at Apple that were in positions that I'd like really like to join other teams, I would just sort of ask them, what can I do to put myself in a position to get an internship at Apple? And if that meant like you should contribute to open source projects. So I then spent the year contributing to open source projects. So when I saw them again, all right, I thought about them again. I sent them an email being like, hey, I did exactly as you said. What else can I do? What would make me a better candidate? And just by continuing through that process is how I landed my first internship.
If you don't have any projects right now and you want to go to the career fair tomorrow, I would definitely just express how important like enthusiasm is. So if you're enthusiastic to learn, if you're enthusiastic to grow as a developer, software engineer, recruiters can see that. And so maybe you don't have any solid experiences, but you can say, you know, I've learned about programming in school and I'm really excited to apply that towards an internship.
Yeah, sure.
Assuming you don't have any relevant project experience, and then you went to a career fair, and you can just talk to a recruiter face to face, but it's most likely when you send your resume to on their company's website, you didn't get any response at all, or they probably just like reject your application straight away. So I'm wondering, is there any like buzzword and you can put adding into your resume, and it's like give you lifting up your opportunity of being selected and moving on to the next recruiting procedures instead of like directly receive rejection emails?
Yeah, so the question is, it's a little bit easier to demonstrate enthusiasm when you're talking to a recruiter face to face. So when you're just giving your resume to a recruiter or putting it on an online site, what can you do on your resume, even if you don't have any project experience, to allow you to move to the next round?
I can't speak to any like hidden code words that you should like add in like -- 53 and suddenly you get through the queue. But I would say, I mean, far more important than that, or at least in my experience, would just be to find the recruiter's email and email them, because the amount of like just resumes they get without any other information is massive compared to the amount of resumes they get with an additional email or follow-up, or some other way that you can say like, I am more interested than the other 10,000 people that just sent you their resumes. Like, I actually want to know more information.
Some online, first of all, applying online without having a connection is hard. A lot of people do that. They get a bulk of applications, so it is hard. But if there's a cover letter section and you really want to work at this company, a lot of people might not fill it out and it might not be required, but that is a great way to show your interest in the position, even if you don't have the best resume possible.
And there's other experiences other than just class projects that could be relevant that shows like a passion towards the mission of the company. So I know for some friends, they've included like they did a teaching experience for younger students across another summer, and that was actually relevant to a education software project they ended up doing later. So they're like, oh, you're a computer science student. You don't have a whole bunch of project experiences, but you do have this teaching component too, and that became an in. So yeah, giving people just parts of your identity that can form a story that's a little bit more shapeable is a good idea too. And that's great fodder for the cover letter.
Find someone, so either you or if you don't have this skill, look for someone who does. Find someone who is like a visual or graphic designer to look at your resume, make sure the typography is good. I'm completely serious about all of this. Typography, spacing, colors, etc. All look good. Find someone who's a really good writer, so like a humanities major or something, to make sure that the grammar is completely perfect and that your explanations of everything you did are as good as they could be. I know that a lot of places when they do resume screens do look for things like, does this resume like look like someone clearly put a bunch of effort into it, and does this resume have like perfect English? Just because it shows like an attention to detail and the fact that you care about effectively communicating things you've done.
Questions?
Alright, one thing I've noticed when we're talking about technical interviews, it seems like they pretty much exclusively interview in Java and Python. Would you say that's true? No?
The question is, do they exclusively interview in Java and Python?
You can interview in any language that you want.
For some places.
Yeah, it's totally dependent on what team you're trying to join at one company. Like, I've been in interviews where they're required to do something in Python, but I've been in interviews where they're like, you're joining an iOS team, so you have to know Swift and Objective-C.
It's sort of, if you have like an online assessment, then it's like actually really important that you know the language super well. But if you don't remember like how to find the length of a string in X, Y, Z, W languages, like it's not the end of the world. They know you want to find the length of the string, and you don't need like the super specific formatting.
So my experience has been, if you have a coding challenge like a HackerRank, those platforms are made so that you can code in basically any language. If you have a phone interview that's done on a site like CoderPad, where it's like a Google Doc but much better than an actual Google Doc for coding, you can also choose almost any language because there will be like a thing that runs and it will like tell you if there are errors. A lot of companies focus on a subset of languages. I know at least last year, Google gave you the option of Java, C++, Python, or JavaScript, and JavaScript was a new addition. And so because those languages are like the first three are like pretty safe for any company, I would suggest picking one like Python, deciding you're going to interview in Python and sticking to it, doing all your practice in it. Python's also good on whiteboards because you don't have to do curly braces and you don't have to close braces, so you have more space. It's also basically pseudocode. And I guess the last thing is, about the Java question specifically, if you've taken 214 here, you can like get away 98% of the time with just writing C# and being like, yes, this is Java, and it'll probably run. Just because we don't teach Java here.
Really? No
RCS classes teach Java?
Databases, right?
Wow.
Well, it doesn't like teach you Java.
No, databases is in Java.
It's in Java, but like
They don't teach it.
they don't teach it.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
I think we're better off without it.
Who have just done C# and like called it Java. A lot of people.
Did you have a question?
I heard that Uber AI Lab did not publish any research paper. Is that true, or is it the same that in the lab where you did your internship? The second question is there any specific skill sets they are looking for the self-driving project? Yeah, sure.
So the question is, self-driving cars at Uber, do they publish research papers, and what are the skills they're looking for?
So I guess it depends on the team. I don't know of a lot of research papers published, and they're pretty darn secretive about everything. However, I was looking through some conference proceedings, and I saw some familiar names in terms of people who are at least out in the machine learning workshop communities, like talking about, machine learning applied to self-driving cars. It was like a workshop about that. It might not be a paper about something technical they developed, but just giving some perspective and trying to organize within that community. I think they're doing that more. In terms of skills they're looking for, there's so many components for a self-driving car that it can really vary in terms of whether you want to, like, some people are doing C++ GUI apps, like full stack development, because that's important to visualize a lot of the data that's flowing in a self-driving car. It's maybe necessary to know some kind of like robotic data flow language. But there's a whole range of experiences there. Yeah, I mean, they have, if you look at the publicly available pictures of the self-driving car, they have like 6 cameras around. They're using computer vision and either C++ libraries. They're experimenting with neural networks. So like all the things that you could imagine useful in a self-driving car. If you have that type of interest, I think they'd be always happy to talk. For their interview questions, I was one of the first intern classes, but they've changed it a little bit where a lot of it is just a 8-hour or over a weekend coding project, and they might give you a data set or some type of thing to code. And yeah, so yeah, we can talk offline if you want to have more specific feedback.
This is like one last thing I want to say. Don't be afraid to, how do I want to say this? If you're ever in a situation where you're fortunate enough to have options as to what you're doing, and I don't just mean like multiple internship offers, but like maybe you could do an internship, or you could do research, or you could do like your own startup or something. Do what you think is going to make you the most excited. Don't just like go to Google because they're Google, right? Like, it's not like, yeah, I don't know how to say this. Like, just do what you think is going to make you like really, really excited to be waking up every day, not just what you think is going to like make yourself look good to other people or so on and so forth. And obviously there are details of people's personal situations where, for example, if you need someone to sponsor a visa, you like basically have to work at a big company. But like within your scope of options, like don't lose track of like what makes you really happy.
You don't want to look back in 10 years and be like, well, I worked at Google. So you want to be happy that you've had impact on the world, and you want to be proud of yourself and that you've done what you really care about.
Totally unrelated note, but as we're giving last minute tips, one pitfall I saw with way too many interns at Apple was that once they get to Apple, they just stop networking. They're happy in their team and they think they're going to be on that team forever. Like if you're lucky enough to get an internship at, I don't know what a startup would be like, but like a big company, like it never ends. Like once you're inside, it's so much easier to network. So I probably emailed 20 to 30 like upper level management people throughout my like first 3 months at Apple, and every single person but one emailed back saying, yes, let's get coffee, or yes, let's meet up one day for like 30 minutes, an hour, or let's go out to dinner. Like if you get to one of these companies and then just stop doing anything, you're betting that you will never, ever want to leave the team that you're currently on. and that's not generally a safe bet.
Don't be afraid of famous people.
That's great advice. She said, "Don't be afraid of famous people."
Like this all applies to someone even if they're like really senior or. Okay, sorry. Oh, sorry. Okay. What everything that he said applies no matter how like senior in a company or famous in like the tech world or famous in the real world someone is. I mean that. They're all like they're all just as happy to get coffee with a random intern.
I would say that I definitely did that, and again, only one person ever said no. So, doesn't hurt.
Questions? Is this it? All right, cool. Let's give our phenomenal panelists a round of applause. So helpful. I know Ryan said if you had specific Uber questions, you can come up and ask him. I'm sure they have a couple minutes if people have specific questions about their companies to come ask. But thank you guys for coming. Come to Hack Nights next week. It's web dev. You want a side project? About to get one.